October 14, 2004, 7 a.m. Across North America, the roar of traditional steel forging presses began to fade. Within a span of just 36 months, over 4,000 skilled machinists and metallurgical workers packed up their lockers for the last time. The heavy steel doors of legacy tool manufacturing plants clanged shut, silencing an era. For decades, the North American industrial tool sector was an immovable titan. It forged the unbreakable wrenches and heavy-duty impact sockets that built modern skylines, bridged continents, and kept million-dollar automotive assembly lines running without a hitch. But almost overnight, the empire fractured. Production lines were rapidly outsourced. Premium chrome molybdenum steel was quietly replaced with cheap, brittle alloys. The gold standard of lifetime durability collapsed into a desperate race for the lowest possible price tag on retail shelves, leaving thousands jobless and professional mechanics holding shattered tools that cost them their livelihoods. How does a manufacturer survive when the entire ecosystem around them is committing industrial suicide? When their oldest, most entrenched competitors surrender to the irresistible financial pressure of cheap mass production? How does one single brand afford to refuse the compromise? This is the story of Genius Tools. Born in 1975, they didn't just witness the collapse of the traditional tool manufacturing industry in North America. They stood directly in the crosshairs of the offshore onslaught. Step into the high-stakes, unforgiving world of heavy industry, where corporate survival isn't dictated by flashy marketing budgets, but by the undeniable, unyielding strength of cold, hard steel. The year is 1975. Across the industrialized world, the air is thick with the scent of raw diesel, ozone from arc welders, and the sharp tang of cutting fluids. This is the zenith of heavy manufacturing, an era defined by massive physical infrastructure. From the sprawling automotive assembly lines of Detroit to the deeply excavated mining operations of the Canadian Shield, the world is being built, maintained, and driven by raw, unyielding mechanical power. In this environment, human hands alone are entirely insufficient. To bend steel, to tighten the colossal bolts of a suspension bridge, or to tear down a seized heavy-duty engine, a worker requires an extension of their own physical will. They require tools. But in the mid-1970s, the tool industry is standing at a quiet crossroads. The consumer market is rapidly expanding, with mass-market brands pushing heavily into the suburban garage. Hardware stores are beginning to stock aisles with shiny, affordable wrench sets designed for the weekend hobbyist, tightening a lawnmower blade or fixing a bicycle. While this strategy proves incredibly lucrative for large corporations, it creates a dangerous vacuum on the actual industrial floor. For a professional master mechanic, a millwright, or an industrial pipeline fitter, a tool is not a weekend accessory, it is a lifeline. In the high-stakes environment of heavy industry, the failure of a tool is not merely an inconvenience, it is a critical operational hazard. When a socket shatters under the immense torque of a pneumatic impact gun on a commercial assembly line, it sends jagged shrapnel flying across the shop floor. More than the physical danger, a broken tool means a halted production line. In 1975, industrial downtime is measured in thousands of dollars per minute. The professionals turning the bolts that keep the economy moving do not care about shiny packaging or clever marketing slogans. They care about one singular metric: absolute, uncompromising reliability. It is precisely within this demanding crucible that Genius Tools is forged. Founded in 1975, the company emerges not with a massive, flashy launch, but with a quiet, intense focus on a highly specific demographic: the professional industrial technician. The founders recognize that the industry is slowly beginning to compromise on quality to chase volume. Genius Tools is born from a contrarian philosophy to build instruments of mechanical manipulation that completely ignore the consumer race to the bottom, focusing entirely on the extreme demands of professional environments. From its very first days of operation, the company's vision is distinctly singular. They are not interested in manufacturing lightweight tools for light-duty tasks. Their gaze is fixed on the heaviest, most punishing applications known to man. This means diving headfirst into the complex and unforgiving science of metallurgy. In 1975, there are no advanced computer simulations to virtually stress test a wrench before it is cast. Quality has to be proven in the physical world, through a painstaking process of trial, error, and meticulous refinement. The early engineering focus of Genius Tools zeroes in heavily on pneumatic applications and the hand tools required to support them. An impact wrench is one of the most violent environments a piece of metal can be subjected to. It delivers thousands of high-velocity rotational strikes per minute, generating massive amounts of heat and kinetic stress. If the steel alloy of a socket is too hard, it becomes brittle and will explode under pressure like glass. If the steel is too soft, the internal geometry will round off, stripping the fastener and rendering the tool completely useless. To solve this, the foundation of Genius Tools is built on finding the absolute perfect metallurgical balance. They begin sourcing premium raw materials, understanding that the soul of a tool is dictated entirely by the quality of the earth it is pulled from. The early manufacturing processes emphasize strict heat treating protocols, ensuring that every single wrench, socket, and drive tool possesses the exact combination of surface hardness for durability and internal flexibility to absorb shock. They start relatively small, producing a focused lineup of essential heavy-duty tools. Yet the ambition from the outset is staggering. The goal is not just to supply a local region, but to build a system of tools capable of meeting the diverse, rigorous demands of global industrial markets, with a particular eye toward the vast, machinery-dense landscapes of North America. They envision their tools in the hands of mechanics surviving the freezing winters of Canadian logging camps and in the sweltering heat of southern agricultural hubs. Word begins to spread, not through television advertisements, but through the vital, unspoken language of the shop floor. A heavy-duty mechanic lends a Genius socket to a colleague to break loose a stubborn, rusted lug nut on a commercial rig. The tool holds. The fastener breaks free. Trust is established. In the world of professional mechanics, loyalty is fiercely earned and rarely given. But once a brand proves it will not fail when the pressure peaks, it becomes indispensable. By the close of the 1970s, the foundation is solidly in place. Genius Tools has proven that its uncompromising philosophy works in the real world. They have the respect of the professionals. However, a localized reputation is only the first step. The industrial boom of the late 20th century demands more than just a few reliable wrenches. It demands a comprehensive, exhaustive catalog of solutions for every conceivable mechanical problem. The company stands at a precipice. They have mastered the art of making the perfect tool in limited capacities. Now they face the monumental challenge of scaling that perfection. They must transform their operation from a specialized forge into a sprawling arsenal of quality, expanding their lineup to thousands of unique items without sacrificing a single fraction of the metallurgical integrity that put them on the map. The journey from a solid foundation to an industrial empire is about to begin, and it will require pushing the limits of manufacturing further than they ever have before. As the 1970s transitioned into the booming industrial expansion of the 1980s, the mechanical demands of North America grew exponentially. Equipment was getting larger, engines were becoming more complex, and the torque specifications required to hold commercial infrastructure together were reaching unprecedented levels. A mechanic working on a massive Caterpillar mining haul truck in the freezing depths of a Canadian winter could no longer rely on a standard wrench. The sheer physical forces involved would snap ordinary steel like dry wood. For Genius Tools, the initial foundation of trust had been laid, but a reputation built on a handful of reliable tools was not enough to sustain an empire. To truly capture the professional industrial market, they had to evolve from a specialized boutique forge into a comprehensive world-class manufacturer. They needed to create an unbroken supply chain of heavy-duty solutions. They needed an arsenal. The transformation began deep within the molecular structure of their raw materials. To scale up production while maintaining the uncompromising standards they had set in 1975, the company had to invest heavily in advanced metallurgy. They understood that the difference between a tool that lasts a lifetime and one that shatters under pressure is often measured in microscopic fractions of chemical elements. For their impact sockets, the crown jewels of the heavy-duty automotive and industrial sectors, Genius Tools turned to a highly specific alloy, chrome molybdenum, or KRMO. Standard chrome vanadium steel, while excellent for hand wrenches, possesses a high surface hardness that makes it dangerously brittle when subjected to the violent, rapid-fire percussive strikes of a 1-inch pneumatic impact gun. CRMO, however, contains molybdenum, an element that drastically increases the steel's toughness and its ability to absorb massive amounts of kinetic shock without fracturing. When a mechanic pulls the trigger on a high-torque impact wrench, the socket acts as a violent intermediary between the machine and the fastener. Genius Tools' CRMO sockets were engineered to flex invisibly on a molecular level, absorbing the blow and transferring the rotational force perfectly, rather than shattering into deadly shrapnel. Simultaneously, for their screwdriver bits and precision driving tools, they pioneered the extensive use of S2 tool steel. Known for its incredible shock resistance and superior tensile strength, S2 steel ensured that the driving tips would not shear off or round out when biting into stubborn, rusted screws. But having the right recipe of steel is only half the battle. The crucible of manufacturing lies in the forging process. Genius Tools refused to take shortcuts in how the metal was shaped. They utilized massive drop forging presses, heating the raw steel billets to exact temperatures before slamming them into shape under thousands of tons of pressure. This hot forging process aligned the internal grain structure of the steel with the shape of the tool, fundamentally maximizing its structural integrity. For more complex geometries, they employed cold forging and precision CNC machining, holding tolerances to fractions of a millimeter. Every piece was then subjected to rigorous, computer-controlled heat treatment protocols, ensuring a perfectly uniform hardness from the core of the metal to its surface. Armed with this bulletproof manufacturing process, Genius Tools began an aggressive, systematic expansion of their catalog. They recognized that an industrial mechanic cannot afford to waste time hunting down different brands for different tasks. If a millwright trusted a Genius impact socket, they also needed to trust the breaker bar, the ratcheting wrench, and the heavy-duty pliers. Over the next 2 decades, the company meticulously engineered and released thousands of new items. By the turn of the century, their catalog had exploded to encompass over 10,000 distinct professional tools. They offered every conceivable size, from microscopic metric precision bits to massive, heavy wall industrial sockets designed to service locomotive engines and bridge infrastructure. This massive, uncompromising arsenal found its most loyal proving ground in the harsh, unforgiving environments of Canada and the broader North American heavy industry. Distributors who catered specifically to professional tradesmen, the supply houses that sold strictly to mining operations, logging camps, commercial diesel shops, and manufacturing plants, began stocking the brand extensively. The tools earned their stripes in the oil sands of Alberta, where machinery operates in sub-zero temperatures that make inferior steel brittle and useless. They were adopted by the heavy machinery mechanics of the Canadian Shield, who operated hundreds of miles away from the nearest replacement parts. In these environments, a tool is an investment in survival and efficiency. To back their engineering, Genius Tools offered a professional lifetime warranty. But unlike consumer brands that use the word lifetime as a disposable marketing gimmick, fully expecting the average homeowner to lose the receipt before the tool ever broke, Genius Tools' warranty was a blood oath to the professional. It was an absolute declaration of confidence that their metallurgy would outlast the mechanic using it. By the early 2000s, Genius Tools had reached a formidable peak. They had successfully built a globally recognized, high-grade manufacturing system that catered entirely to the professional elite. Their factories were humming, their quality control was legendary, and their position in the professional supply chain seemed unshakable. They had mastered the science of steel. They had conquered the physical demands of heavy industry. But as they looked out over the manufacturing landscape of the new millennium, a different kind of pressure was building. It was not a physical force that could be measured in foot-pounds of torque or tested in a laboratory. It was an invisible, catastrophic economic shift brewing across the ocean, a tidal wave of hyper-commercialization that was about to crash down on the shores of North America, threatening to wash away every standard the legacy tool industry had ever built. The turn of the millennium did not arrive in the heavy manufacturing sector with a sudden crash, but rather with the slow, methodical creak of shipping container doors swinging open at the ports of Vancouver, Los Angeles, and Seattle. For decades, the North American industrial ecosystem had operated on a simple, unspoken economic pact. Premium labor and premium materials resulted in a premium, high-cost product that professionals were willing to pay for. But as globalization accelerated in the late 1990s and early 2000s, a new intoxicating philosophy began to infect the corporate boardrooms of the world's largest hardware conglomerates. It was the pursuit of the absolute lowest bottom line. The offshore onslaught began quietly. At first, it was just the consumer-grade tools, the lightweight screwdrivers and socket sets destined for suburban garages and big-box retail shelves. These were manufactured in massive, low-cost overseas factories where speed and volume entirely superseded metallurgical integrity. For a homeowner assembling a bookshelf, a wrench stamped from low-grade carbon steel was perfectly adequate. But the invisible boundary between the consumer market and the professional industrial market was about to be breached. Sensing astronomical profit margins, overseas manufacturers and massive retail chains began targeting the professional sector. The strategy was dangerously simple. Clone the exact look, shape, and polish of professional-grade equipment, but strip out the expensive, invisible elements that actually made the tool strong. They bypassed the costly, time-consuming hot forging processes. They swapped out premium, shock-absorbing alloys for cheaper, brittle metals. They reduced the thickness of socket walls by fractions of a millimeter to save on raw material costs. They applied a thick layer of high-gloss chrome plating, ensuring that under the fluorescent lights of a supply warehouse, a $5 replica looked absolutely identical to a $50 professional instrument. This optical illusion triggered a seismic shift in the Canadian and North American distribution networks. Suddenly, purchasing managers at major industrial supply houses were looking at spreadsheets that defied logic. They were being offered shipping containers full of heavy-duty tools at a fraction of the traditional cost. The temptation was irresistible. The mantra of bulletproof reliability was rapidly replaced by a new, highly destructive industry buzzword: good enough. The true tragedy of this era was not just the influx of cheap imports, but the surrender of the legacy giants. The oldest, most respected North American tool manufacturers, brands that had spent a century building reputations in the railroad yards and steel mills, found themselves completely outflanked. Staring at plummeting market shares and demanding shareholders, these titans buckled. In a series of quiet, behind-closed-doors decisions, legendary companies began shutting down their domestic foundries. They laid off thousands of skilled metallurgists and machinists, opting instead to license their prestigious brand names to overseas mass production facilities. The logos stamped on the steel remained the same, but the soul of the tools had been hollowed out. For Genius Tools, this global shift represented an existential threat of terrifying proportions. They found themselves standing directly in the path of an economic tsunami. Their entire business model was predicated on producing the highest quality instruments possible, using expensive raw materials and painstaking manufacturing processes. Now they were suddenly forced to compete in a market that no longer seemed to care about what was inside the steel. The pressure on the company was immense and immediate. Telephones in the Genius Tools sales offices began to ring with an alarming, repetitive message. Distributors and industrial suppliers, partners they had worked with for years, were demanding aggressive price cuts. The conversations were brutal and entirely driven by the new bottom line. Suppliers would point to the new, cheap, offshore alternatives flooding their loading docks and issue ultimatums. Match this price, or we give your shelf space to them. It was a mathematical impossibility. You cannot hot forge premium steel, subjected to rigorous computer-controlled heat treatments, and sell it at the price of a cheap stamped replica. The executives and engineers at Genius Tools faced an agonizing crossroads. The easiest path, the path chosen by almost every major competitor, was to compromise. They could easily source cheaper steel. They could skip a few heat treatment cycles. They could outsource production to the lowest bidder, slap their logo on the side, and maintain their profit margins. It would save the company in the short term. It would keep the distributors happy, but it would also mean betraying the very professionals who had built their brand. It would mean breaking the unspoken oath they had made to the heavy-duty mechanics in the freezing oil patches and the sweltering assembly lines. If a Genius Tools impact socket was cheapened, it wouldn't just break. It would shatter into lethal shrapnel when subjected to the violent torque of industrial machinery. In a defining moment of corporate defiance, Genius Tools refused to yield. They looked at the collapsing standards of the industry and chose to hold the line. They would not change their steel. They would not alter their forging process. They would not participate in the race to the bottom. It was a decision of profound integrity, but it came with a massive, immediate cost. By refusing to lower their prices to match the offshore flood, Genius Tools began to lose lucrative contracts. The shiny, cheap alternatives were taking over the Canadian supply chains. The market was being poisoned by inferior metal, and the industry had not yet realized the deadly consequences of this mass compromise. Genius Tools was surviving, but they were being pushed to the absolute fringes, watching helplessly as the ecosystem they relied on began to crack under the weight of its own greed. The true cost of cheap was about to be paid, not in dollars, but in shattered steel and halted production lines. By the mid-2000s, the true battleground of the North American heavy tool industry was no longer the factory floor. The clash of drop forging presses and the intense heat of the steel foundries had been replaced by the quiet, sterile hum of corporate boardrooms. The balance of power had fundamentally shifted away from the engineers who designed the tools, landing squarely in the hands of the middlemen. The massive industrial distributors, supply house networks, and retail conglomerates. These distribution networks held the ultimate leverage. They owned the physical shelf space and controlled the supply catalogs that every procurement officer at every major logging camp, mining operation, and automotive plant ordered from. For decades, the relationship between manufacturer and distributor had been a partnership based on mutual respect for quality. But as the flood of inexpensive offshore manufacturing normalized rock-bottom prices, the distributors' priorities violently realigned. Profit margins became the singular, governing metric of the industry. Purchasing managers at major North American supply chains began looking at their legacy suppliers with cold, uncompromising scrutiny. If an unbranded, mass-produced offshore wrench could offer the distributor a 40% profit margin, why should they continue stocking a premium brand that only offered 15%? The ultimatum delivered to the legacy toolmakers was simple, brutal, and industry-altering. Slash your wholesale prices to match the imports, increase our margins, or lose your place in our catalog entirely. Faced with the terrifying prospect of losing access to the market, several of the oldest and most venerated North American tool brands made a fatal misstep. They capitulated because they could not magically alter the fundamental economics of premium metallurgy. The only way to meet the distributor's price demands was to quietly, systematically degrade the product. This era marked the beginning of the Great Quality Crisis, a period of metallurgical treason hidden behind high-gloss chrome. Legacy manufacturers began substituting premium chrome molybdenum for cheaper, softer carbon steel blends. They reduced the overall mass of the tools, hollowing out the handles of ratchets and thinning the impact walls of heavy-duty sockets to shave mere pennies off the cost of raw materials. To the naked eye, sitting under the bright fluorescent lights of a supply warehouse, the tools looked exactly the same as they had a decade prior. They carried the same prestigious logos. They possessed the same polished finish. But internally, their structural integrity had been hollowed out. The middlemen had won. They secured their massive profit margins, and the shelves remained stocked. But this artificial financial victory set a devastating trap that was about to spring shut on the shop floor. The industry had forgotten that while you can negotiate with a purchasing manager, you cannot negotiate with the laws of physics. It did not take long for the consequences of this mass compromise to manifest in the real world. In the heavy-duty diesel bays and industrial manufacturing plants across Canada and the United States, the newly cheapened tools began to fail with alarming, unprecedented frequency. Professional mechanics, accustomed to leaning their entire body weight into a breaker bar to free a seized bolt, suddenly found themselves crashing to the concrete floor as the steel snapped in half. Pneumatic impact guns, which had operated for years with premium sockets, were now shattering the newly thinned walls of inferior replacements, sending jagged pieces of metal flying across the workspace. the industry was experiencing a terrifying realization. The tools they relied on for their livelihoods had been secretly weaponized by corporate greed. This widespread failure triggered a secondary, even more destructive economic shockwave: the collapse of the lifetime warranty illusion. To compete with legacy brands, the influx of cheap offshore tools had heavily marketed their own lifetime warranties. When the legacy brands degraded their quality, they too relied on this promise to placate angry customers. But the entire premise was built on a cynical, statistical gamble. The corporate accountants knew the tools would break, but they calculated that the tools were now so incredibly cheap to produce that they could afford to replace a broken wrench 3 or 4 times over and still turn a profit. It was a strategy of planned obsolescence, treating heavy-duty industrial equipment as disposable commodities. For Genius Tools, this chaotic landscape presented a terrifying, existential paradox. They were hemorrhaging shelf space to competitors who were playing this cynical numbers game. The pressure from distributors to join the race to the bottom was suffocating. Yet Genius Tools knew that for a genuine, heavy-duty manufacturer, cheapening the steel was a direct path to bankruptcy. Because Genius Tools catered exclusively to the extreme demands of the professional market, their equipment was subjected to the highest levels of torque and stress. If they compromised their metallurgy, their tools would not just break occasionally, they would fail catastrophically across the board. The resulting avalanche of legitimate warranty claims from irate industrial mechanics would financially ruin the company within months. They could not play the statistical replacement game. Their survival literally depended on the tool never breaking in the first place. They were trapped between a distribution network demanding cheaper products and the ironclad reality that lowering their standards would destroy their brand and their balance sheet. As the legacy titans around them continued to trade their century-old reputations for short-term retail survival, Genius Tools found itself standing isolated in a shrinking corner of the market, desperately holding on to a standard of quality that the rest of the industry had decided was obsolete. The bottleneck was tightening, and the fight for physical survival in North America was about to reach its absolute breaking point. The vast, unforgiving geography of Canada presents a unique logistical nightmare for heavy industry. Stretching nearly 10 million square kilometers from the maritime shipyards of the Atlantic to the remote, frozen logging camps of British Columbia, it is a landscape that demands immediate, localized solutions. When a multi-million-dollar piece of excavating equipment breaks down in the oil sands of northern Alberta, the mechanic cannot wait a week for a specialized wrench to be forged and shipped from a central factory. The replacement part and the heavy-duty tool required to install it must already be sitting on a shelf in a regional supply house, ready for immediate dispatch. This physical, geographically dispersed distribution network is the vital nervous system of North American manufacturing. By the late 2000s, this nervous system was suffering from a massive, systemic blockage. The gatekeepers of this network, the regional industrial distributors, the independent supply houses, and the massive wholesale hardware hubs, were facing their own intense economic pressures. Rising commercial real estate prices, soaring transportation costs, and increasing operational overhead meant that the sheer physical space within a warehouse had become incredibly expensive. Every square foot of shelving had to generate maximum financial yield. This economic reality collided violently with the influx of offshore manufacturing. When shipping containers loaded with mass-produced, low-quality tools began arriving at the ports of Vancouver and Los Angeles, the distributors saw a financial lifeline. Because these imported replicas were manufactured with inferior, inexpensive metals and bypassed costly heat treatment processes, their wholesale acquisition cost was staggeringly low. A distributor could purchase a pallet of these tools for a fraction of what a legacy brand charged, mark them up considerably, and still undercut the premium market. A section of shelving that once generated a modest, steady profit with a high-quality brand could now generate triple the revenue with cheap imports. For Genius Tools, the shift triggered a catastrophic bottleneck. The company had spent decades meticulously building an arsenal of over 10,000 specific, highly engineered items. Their strength lay in their comprehensive capability. They didn't just make the common sizes. They manufactured the massive, specialized drive sockets, the heavy wall impact extensions, and the precise torque instruments required for the most obscure industrial applications. But maintaining this immense catalog required massive physical inventory. Storing industrial steel is a capital-intensive burden. It is incredibly heavy, it requires reinforced logistics, and if it does not sell quickly, it becomes dead weight on a company's balance sheet. As the purchasing managers at major North American supply networks became intoxicated by the high profit margins of cheap imports, they began aggressively purging their catalogs. They issued harsh directives to clear out slow-moving, premium inventory. They only wanted to stock the fast movers, the basic, common sizes that sold quickly to a broader, less demanding demographic. The battle for survival abruptly shifted from the metallurgical laboratories to the fluorescent-lit aisles of industrial distributors and regional hubs across the continent. The sales representatives for Genius Tools found themselves fighting a desperate, often losing battle against corporate spreadsheets. They were no longer just explaining the superior shock resistance of chrome molybdenum, they were begging for physical shelf space. They tried to remind the distributors that professional mechanics relied on a complete ecosystem of tools, and that stripping away the specialized heavy-duty items was abandoning the very core of the industrial sector. But immediate retail greed proved entirely deaf to long-term industrial logic. Across Canada and the United States, the physical footprint of premium, uncompromised tools began to shrink at an alarming rate. Entire aisles that had proudly displayed legacy brands and steadfast manufacturers like Genius Tools were systematically dismantled. The high-gloss, brittle imports flooded into the prime retail space, aggressively pushing the premium tools into the dark back corners of the warehouse, or worse, relegating them to special order-only status. In the high-stakes world of heavy industry, special order is effectively a death sentence. When a critical production line is halted, costing a company thousands of dollars every minute in downtime, a mechanic cannot place a special order and wait 3 days for a quality tool to arrive. They are forced to buy whatever is immediately available on the shelf. By squeezing Genius Tools off the primary displays, the distribution network was intentionally cutting off the company's air supply. Genius Tools was suffocating. They were sitting on warehouses full of world-class, uncompromising steel, but the arteries connecting them to the professionals who desperately needed them were firmly clogged by cheap, highly profitable metal. Their absolute refusal to lower their manufacturing standards meant their production costs remained high, while the artificial restriction of shelf space meant their sales volume was being severely choked. It was a perfect, devastating storm of financial strangulation. The environment had become entirely hostile to anyone prioritizing quality over margin. Pushed to the absolute brink of financial endurance, Genius Tools watched helplessly as the distribution network gleefully sold out the industry. But this artificial, spreadsheet-driven prosperity was a fragile illusion. The cheap tools had successfully taken over the shelves, but they were about to be put to the ultimate test on the unforgiving shop floor. The industry had chosen its poison, and the spectacular, catastrophic collapse of the North American tool legacy was about to begin. The fundamental law of heavy industry is brutally simple. Physics does not care about corporate profit margins. A spreadsheet can be manipulated to show explosive quarterly growth, but when a heavy-duty mechanic applies 800 foot-pounds of torque to a rusted suspension bolt, the steel either holds or it shatters. By the late 2000s, the bill for a decade of metallurgical compromise came due across North America, and the cost was catastrophic. The collapse did not begin in the boardrooms. It began on the shop floors, in the diesel maintenance bays, and deep within the subterranean levels of Canadian mining operations. The industry had been flooded with inexpensive offshore replicas and legacy brands that had quietly thinned out their metal. For a brief period, the distributors had celebrated their record-breaking margins. But then, the avalanche of fractured steel began. Industrial procurement managers, who had eagerly switched their supply contracts to cheaper tool lines to save their budgets, were suddenly facing a terrifying reality. The initial savings on the purchase price of the tools were being completely obliterated by the astronomical costs of mechanical downtime. In the oil sands of Alberta, a snapped impact socket could delay the maintenance of a multi-million-dollar haul truck. Every hour that vehicle sat idle cost the company thousands of dollars in lost production. The cheap tools were not saving money, They were actively hemorrhaging it. The professional mechanics, the ultimate arbiters of quality, revolted. In logging camps and manufacturing plants, workers began throwing the compromised high-gloss tools directly into the scrap bins. Safety officers at major industrial sites started issuing blanket bans on specific brands after shattered sockets caused severe shrapnel injuries on the floor. They demanded a return to the absolute reliability that the industry used to guarantee. This shop floor rebellion triggered a devastating chain reaction that traveled violently back up the supply chain. The legacy North American tool manufacturers, the century-old titans who had surrendered to the retail pressure and degraded their products, were suddenly hit by an unmanageable tsunami of warranty claims. Their financial models of planned obsolescence had fatally underestimated the sheer, unforgiving violence of professional heavy industry. They had calculated they could afford to replace a broken tool 3 times. They did not calculate that the tool would break on its very first use. Within a span of just a few years, the financial bedrock of the legacy tool empires began to crumble. The massive backlog of broken inventory draining their accounts could not be ignored. To stop the bleeding, these companies were forced to make devastating cuts. And the first casualties were the physical factories that had built their original reputations. Across the United States and Canada, the historic manufacturing hubs of the Industrial Revolution began to go dark. The massive building-sized drop-forging presses that had rhythmically pounded red-hot steel into shape for over a century were abruptly powered down. The fires in the heat treatment furnaces were extinguished. The heavy iron gates of legendary manufacturing plants were padlocked, adorned with cold, legal notices of bankruptcy and liquidation. The human toll of this collapse was staggering. Thousands of highly skilled workers, master machinists, metallurgists who could read the carbon content of steel by the color of its sparks, and assembly line veterans who had spent their entire adult lives perfecting the craft of toolmaking, were unceremoniously handed cardboard boxes and escorted off the premises. Entire manufacturing towns, built around the steady, reliable heartbeat of the tool foundries, were thrust into sudden, devastating economic depression. Decades of specialized, generational knowledge regarding North American steel forging vanished into thin air, replaced by empty, rusting husks of brick and corrugated iron. Even the ruthless middlemen, the industrial distributors who had orchestrated the race to the bottom, could not escape the fallout. As major commercial contractors and industrial operations refused to purchase the inferior products, the distributors found their warehouses choked with dead inventory. The cheap, high-margin tools they had aggressively pushed to the front of their catalogs were now radioactive. Nobody in the professional sector wanted them. Several regional supply networks, heavily over-leveraged on the promise of cheap imports, buckled under the weight of their own unsellable stock and filed for insolvency. The North American heavy tool sector had effectively committed industrial suicide. By chasing the immediate gratification of cheap retail margins, they had destroyed the ecosystem that supported them. The landscape was utterly unrecognizable, transformed into a graveyard of fallen giants and abandoned foundries. Yet as the dust of the collapse settled over the industry, a stark and unexpected reality emerged from the wreckage. While the legacy brands filed for bankruptcy and the distribution networks scrambled to survive the backlash of their own greed, one manufacturer remained standing, entirely intact. Genius Tools had spent the last decade being marginalized, pushed to the back of the warehouses, and financially suffocated because they categorically refused to compromise their steel. They had endured the agonizing bottleneck, watching their competitors get rich off inferior products. But because they never thinned their sockets, because they never abandoned their chrome molybdenum alloys, and because they never betrayed the professional mechanic, they were completely insulated from the warranty avalanche that had just destroyed their rivals. Their tools had never stopped working, and as the heavy industrial sector desperately searched the ruins for anything they could trust, the absolute unyielding integrity of Genius Tools was about to shift from a dangerous financial liability into their greatest, most untouchable asset. The giants had fallen, but the line had been held. In the immediate wake of the Great Quality Crisis, the North American industrial landscape resembled a commercial battlefield. The ground was littered with the shattered reputations of century-old legacy brands, and the distribution networks were paralyzed by the sheer volume of fractured, unsellable inventory. It was an environment defined by panic, betrayal, and a desperate scramble for financial cover. Amidst this sweeping devastation, the facilities of Genius Tools stood as an isolated fortress. They had survived the initial onslaught, but survival in a poisoned ecosystem is a grueling daily war of attrition. The executives and engineers at Genius Tools faced an agonizing reality. While their competitors were burning in the fires of their own compromised standards, the immediate financial reward for Genius Tools was not a sudden influx of cash. Instead, they were still trapped in the chokehold of the Canadian and North American distribution bottleneck. The middlemen, though severely wounded by the warranty crisis, were stubbornly clinging to the remnants of their high-margin business models. They were reluctant to restock premium, high-cost tools, hoping that the anger on the shop floors would eventually subside. Inside the company, the pressure to finally yield reached its absolute zenith. It would have been incredibly easy and undeniably logical from a purely accounting perspective to introduce a mid-tier line of tools. They could have quietly sourced a slightly cheaper steel blend, stamped a secondary logo on it, and appeased the desperate distributors who needed something, anything, to put on their empty shelves that offered a favorable margin. It was the standard corporate playbook for navigating an economic downturn: pivot, compromise, and protect the balance sheet at all costs. But Genius Tools recognized the fatal flaw in that strategy. They understood that the moment a manufacturer allows the concept of good enough to enter its foundries, the rot becomes terminal. In a decisive, historic moment of corporate defiance, they chose to double down. Instead of loosening their standards to appease a broken retail network, Genius Tools violently tightened them. They placed the entirety of their corporate existence on a single, uncompromising wager: the belief that the fundamental truth of quality cannot be permanently hidden by marketing, and that the professional mechanic would ultimately dictate the survival of the market. This doubling down manifested immediately on the factory floor. While other brands were laying off their quality control inspectors to save money, Genius Tools expanded their testing laboratories. They instituted draconian metallurgical audits. Every single shipment of raw chrome, molybdenum, and S2 steel was subjected to intense spectrometric analysis before it was ever allowed near a forging press. If the microscopic chemical composition of the steel deviated by even a fraction of a percent from their proprietary requirements, the entire multi-ton batch was unconditionally rejected and sent back to the foundry. The physical testing of the finished tools became an exercise in engineered brutality. In their quality assurance bays, heavy-duty impact sockets were strapped into massive, computer-controlled torque testing anvils. These machines were designed to simulate the absolute worst-case scenarios of heavy industry, pushing the metal far beyond its advertised limits. They measured the exact rotational force required to strip the internal geometry or fracture the outer wall. A single failure in a random sample batch meant the entire production run was immediately quarantined and melted down. There was absolutely zero tolerance for variance. The warranty they offered was a lifetime promise, and they were ensuring that the steel would literally outlive the hands that held it. However, possessing the finest tools on the continent was meaningless if the distribution networks refused to put them in front of the mechanics. To break the retail bottleneck, Genius Tools had to execute a daring grassroots insurgency. They realized they could no longer rely on the traditional supply chain to advocate for their product. They had to bypass the boardroom entirely and go directly to the trenches. The company deployed its sales representatives not to the plush offices of wholesale purchasers, but to the grim, oil-stained floors of commercial diesel bays, remote logging camps, and heavy manufacturing plants. They sought out the master mechanics, the millwrights, and the shift foremen, the men and women whose livelihoods and physical safety had been so deeply compromised by the influx of cheap steel. They did not bring glossy brochures, they brought raw metal. The strategy was visceral and irrefutable. A Genius Tools representative would walk into a heavy-duty shop, find a mechanic struggling with a stubbornly seized, rusted bolt on a piece of massive earth-moving equipment, and offer them a test. The mechanic would apply their pneumatic impact gun using one of the new, cheap imported sockets. When it inevitably failed, Rounding off the fastener or snapping entirely, the representative would silently hand them a Genius Tools chrome molybdenum socket. The mechanic would pull the trigger. The Genius socket would absorb the massive kinetic shock. The internal geometry would grip the damaged bolt with uncompromising precision, and the fastener would break free. It was a slow, grueling, trench-by-trench campaign, but the impact was profound. Trust, once shattered by the legacy brands, was meticulously rebuilt, one bolt at a time. The professional mechanics experienced the undeniable physical difference of true metallurgical integrity. They realized that Genius Tools had not abandoned them. This grassroots strategy sparked a localized rebellion that slowly began to spread across the North American industrial landscape. Mechanics stopped asking their procurement officers for a 1-inch impact socket. They began violently demanding a Genius Tools 1-inch impact socket. If the local distributor did not carry it, the mechanic would force the supply house to special order it, or they would find a supplier who did. The leverage was finally shifting back to where it belonged. The end user, the worker whose sweat and safety actually drove the industry, was seizing control of the supply chain. Genius Tools had stood their ground through the darkest period of North American manufacturing, absorbing the financial blows and refusing to surrender their soul. By holding the line, they had not just saved their company, they had inadvertently positioned themselves to lead the monumental recovery of an entire industry. The late 2010s marked the end of the great industrial delusion. The offshore onslaught, which had promised infinite retail margins and frictionless corporate profit, had instead left the North American manufacturing sector battered and deeply cynical. The expansive warehouses of once mighty industrial distributors had become graveyards of unsellable, compromised steel. The tool war was effectively over, not because a peace treaty was signed in a boardroom, but because the raw, undeniable physics of heavy industry had systematically annihilated the cheap alternatives. In the aftermath, a profound and necessary reckoning swept across the Canadian and American supply chains. The accountants and procurement managers, who had previously governed the entire industry by looking strictly at spreadsheets, were forced to confront a brutal mathematical truth. They had attempted to save $20 on the wholesale purchase of a heavy-duty impact socket, but that singular decision had resulted in shattered metal, severe shrapnel injuries to skilled workers, and hours of halted production on multi-million-dollar commercial assembly lines. When factored against the staggering real-world cost of industrial downtime, the cheap tools were violently exposed as the most expensive investments a company could possibly make. The paradigm shifted rapidly back to the shop floor. The era of blind brand loyalty was dead. Professional mechanics, millwrights, and heavy-duty diesel technicians had been burned too many times by legacy logos stamped onto inferior metal. They no longer trusted the glossy marketing brochures or the promises of sales representatives. They only trusted the steel in their hands. This newly awakened, highly skeptical workforce began subjecting their equipment to intense, unforgiving scrutiny. If a tool felt even marginally too light, if the chrome plating chipped under minor stress, or if the socket walls flexed under pneumatic pressure, it was immediately rejected and thrown into the scrap bin. Corporate safety officers at major industrial conglomerates implemented strict new procurement protocols to protect their workforce. Tools were no longer classified as mere disposable accessories. They were categorized as critical safety equipment. The acceptable failure rate was permanently reset to 0. Any distributor attempting to pass off substandard carbon steel blends to a commercial mining operation or a specialized pipeline project was immediately blacklisted. This grassroots demand for uncompromising quality traveled up the supply chain like a high-voltage electric shock. The Canadian distribution bottleneck, the artificial restriction that had nearly choked the life out of premium manufacturers, was forcibly broken by the end users. Regional supply houses and major industrial wholesale hubs realized that if they did not stock the heavy-duty, professional-grade equipment the mechanics were actively demanding, they would lose their lucrative commercial contracts entirely. The high-gloss, brittle imports were quietly swept off the prime retail shelves, relegated to the discount bins, or shipped out to consumer hardware stores where they belonged. It was within this scarred, recovering landscape that Genius Tools reaped the ultimate reward for their agonizing decade of defiance. As the market desperately scrambled to find manufacturers who could still deliver true, industrial-grade metallurgy, Genius Tools did not have to scramble to rebuild their foundries or completely overhaul their quality control protocols. They simply opened their warehouse doors. While the former titans of the legacy tool industry desperately tried to reverse engineer their own degraded supply chains, struggling to rehire the skilled metallurgists they had fired a decade prior, Genius Tools was already operating at absolute peak capacity. They had never stopped using premium chrome molybdenum and S2 tool steel. They had never skipped a critical heat treatment cycle to save pennies. Their absolute stubbornness, once viewed as a fatal corporate flaw by the middlemen, was now hailed as visionary integrity. Their massive arsenal of over 10,000 specialized items, the very inventory that the distributors had previously dismissed as slow-moving dead weight, was suddenly recognized as the most vital, comprehensive resource in the heavy manufacturing sector. They possessed the heavy wall impact extensions, the massive metric drive sockets, and the precise, specialized configurations that the rebuilding industry desperately needed to get its machinery back online. The brand's steadfast refusal to compromise their steel during the darkest days of the crisis transformed them from a marginalized, embattled outsider into a central, load-bearing pillar of the North American industrial recovery. The mechanics freezing in the logging camps of British Columbia and sweating in the sprawling oil patches of Alberta did not need to be convinced of the brand's reliability through expensive, new advertising campaigns. They already knew. They remembered exactly who had handed them the unbroken socket when the rest of the industry's tools had shattered. The aftermath of the tool war was a brutal, expensive lesson for the corporate world. It proved that in the uncompromising realm of heavy manufacturing, you cannot cheat the laws of physics, and you cannot outsmart the professionals who build the world with their bare hands. The industry had bled out over a fraction of a percent in profit margins, only to realize that true value was measured exclusively in absolute reliability. As the dust finally settled, the surviving landscape was smaller and leaner, but infinitely stronger. Genius Tools had survived the storm, but survival was no longer the objective. They were now standing at the precipice of a new era, ready to define the future. Today, the industrial landscape of North America moves at a blistering, unprecedented pace. The physical demands placed on machinery have evolved far beyond the imaginations of the engineers who built the 20th century. We are currently erecting towering offshore wind turbines, servicing massive fleets of high-voltage electric commercial vehicles, and maintaining robotic assembly lines that operate with microscopic, terrifying precision. Yet despite all the silicon, sensors, and software governing the modern world, the fundamental physical reality of heavy industry remains completely unchanged. Infrastructure is still held together by threaded fasteners, and when those massive steel bolts need to be torqued down to exact specifications or broken loose after years of corrosive exposure in a harsh environment, software is utterly useless. The world still fundamentally requires the brutal, unyielding application of mechanical force. In the modern hardware market, the illusion of choice is staggering. Walk into any major retail chain, and you will see walls of brightly packaged tools boasting hundreds of different, familiar brand names. But behind the glossy marketing lies a deeply consolidated, often hollow corporate reality. The vast majority of those legacy brands, the very names that once built the North American industrial empire, no longer exist as independent manufacturers. They are merely intellectual property. They are logos owned by massive global holding companies, stamped onto identical, mass-produced steel, rolling out of the exact same overseas megafactories. The original foundries that birthed those historic brands have long since been demolished, paved over to create parking lots, or redeveloped into expensive commercial real estate. But far removed from the retail aisles and the corporate acquisitions, the legacy of Genius Tools continues to be written in heavy, uncompromising metal. They did not become a casualty of the offshore onslaught, nor did they allow themselves to be transformed into a hollowed-out marketing shell. Today, the company operates as a fiercely independent, global titan of professional industrial equipment, maintaining an active, meticulously engineered catalog of over 10,000 specific tools. Their supply chains across Canada and the United States are no longer bottlenecked by skeptical distributors chasing cheap margins. Instead, they operate as direct, vital arteries feeding the most demanding, high-stakes mechanical environments on the continent. Their impact sockets, still rigorously forged from premium chrome molybdenum, are the instruments of choice in the brutal, freezing environments of the Canadian oil sands, where extreme sub-zero temperatures turn inferior steel into glass. Their precision driving tools are utilized to maintain the complex fleets of modern commercial airlines. Their heavy-duty wrenches remain in the hands of the elite millwrights, keeping multi-billion-dollar manufacturing plants online. In these specialized sectors, Genius Tools is universally recognized not as a luxury preference, but as a strict operational necessity. The true legacy of the company, however, is not measured in their global sales volume, the sheer size of their catalog, or their market dominance. It is measured in the physical survival of the steel itself. In heavy-duty diesel shops across North America, there is a quiet, powerful generational shift currently occurring. Master mechanics who fought their way through the great quality crisis of the 2000s are now reaching retirement age. As they pack up their massive rolling steel tool chests for the final time, they are not throwing their equipment away. They are passing it down to the next generation of young apprentices entering the trades. Among those handed-down instruments are the Genius Tools impact sockets, breaker bars, and heavy-duty ratchets purchased decades ago. They are battered. The black oxide finishes are worn completely smooth from years of relentless friction. They bear the visible, physical scars of thousands of hours of high-torque abuse. But internally, their metallurgical structure remains absolutely perfect. They have not shattered. They have not rounded off. They are fully capable of enduring another entire lifetime of punishing industrial labor. This quiet, generational transfer of unbroken steel on the shop floor is the ultimate, undeniable validation of the company's foundational philosophy. The broader story of the North American tool industry is frequently told as a tragedy, a cautionary documentary of how corporate greed and the relentless pursuit of retail profit margins hollowed out a proud, century-old manufacturing tradition. It is a story of silent drop forges, abandoned factory towns, and compromised worker safety. But the survival and subsequent triumph of Genius Tools decisively proves that this industrial collapse was not an inevitable, unstoppable law of globalization. It was a choice. When the rest of the industry chose to look at a heavy-duty wrench and see only a spreadsheet, Genius Tools looked at the exact same wrench and saw the mechanic whose life, livelihood, and physical safety depended entirely on its structural integrity. They proved that a manufacturing corporation can stand directly in the path of an overwhelming economic tsunami, categorically refuse to lower its engineering standards, and not just survive the impact, but emerge from the wreckage as the undisputed gold standard. In an era increasingly defined by disposable commodities and planned obsolescence, the unbroken legacy of Genius Tools stands as a towering, heavy metal monument to the enduring, unbreakable power of absolute integrity. The story of Genius Tools is more than just a chronological account of a hardware manufacturer surviving a volatile global market. It is a profound reflection on the friction between modern economic theory and the unyielding physical reality of the working world. For decades, corporate boardrooms have been seduced by the illusion that everything can be optimized, cheapened, and outsourced without consequence. We live in an era where the term lifetime durability has been downgraded from a sacred oath to a disposable marketing slogan. The massive disruption of the traditional North American tool industry was the direct, catastrophic result of this philosophy. It was a commercial ecosystem that nearly destroyed itself by prioritizing the short-term profit margins of the middleman over the long-term safety and efficiency of the professional mechanic. But Genius Tools proved that a spreadsheet cannot bend steel. They demonstrated that while you can manipulate a financial ledger, you cannot negotiate with the laws of physics. By categorically refusing to compromise their metallurgy, they absorbed immense financial pressure and survived a retail bottleneck that would have easily crushed a lesser company. They held the line not because it was the most profitable choice at the time, but because they fundamentally understood that to an industrial worker, a professional tool is a lifeline. Their unbroken legacy stands as a stark, heavy metal reminder. True value is not found in the cheapest initial purchase price, but in the absolute certainty that when the mechanical pressure peaks, the steel will hold. In a world increasingly defined by mass-produced mediocrity and planned obsolescence, uncompromising quality is no longer just a traditional business model. It is an act of sheer rebellion. As we look toward the future of heavy industry, the machines will undoubtedly become more complex, but the foundational demand for raw, reliable mechanical force will remain unchanged. And as long as there are massive commercial bolts to turn and heavy-duty diesel engines to rebuild, the industry will always return to the manufacturers who respect the craft enough to do it right. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the uncompromising world of industrial steel. If you found this story of corporate resilience and mechanical integrity compelling, please consider subscribing to the channel and leaving a comment below. What other legacy industries, manufacturing crises, or untold corporate survival stories would you like us to explore next? Until then, keep building, keep repairing, and always hold the line.